A while ago, I made a video about some of the strongest characters in Magi, so I wanted to make a video about one of the characters that was in it, with that character being Alibaba. Now, when it comes to Alibaba, it's a weird case. So going off that, let's just start with who is Alibaba exactly. Alibaba is introduced in the beginning and go off first impressions, or at least in my eyes. Alibaba was, to be honest, a loser and a pushover at that. By the way, he also meets Aladdin early on too, with Alibaba being introduced in chapter 2, or if you watch the anime, episode 1. And when he's introduced, he also meet Aladdin in the same process. By the way, it's shown in this chapter a tendency that Alibaba tends to have, that being Alibaba is the least threatening person until he's forced to lock in. By the way, meeting Aladdin was probably the best thing that happened to Alibaba, because they went to explore a dungeon together to conquer it. This actually led to a variety of things. This actually had they ended up meeting Morgiana before they took on the dungeon, and later facing her again while they were still in the dungeon, and while she was still a slave of Jamil. If you've seen the anime, you know she becomes an important part of the team, but if you never read the manga, you may not know that at the end of the story, she actually ends up marrying Alibaba. But to get back to the dungeon, him and Aladdin actually end up conquering it, with Aladdin, my fault, not Aladdin, Alibaba, investing Jamil in a one-on-one sword fight with his royal sword skills. This is how it was determined that Alibaba would be the one to wield the power of Amon, the fire gem. Later, they show Alibaba backstory in chapter 38, Garbage Heap Town, where Alibaba was shown to live in the slums. But not by himself though. He actually lived there with his mother and a boy named Kasim and Kasim's little sister. Now, Kasim wasn't his real brother, but after his father died, Alibaba's mother took him in, and his sister too, until she eventually passed away, leaving the three alone. After this, the three struggled to survive in the slums until one fateful day, the king of Balbas showed up to reveal that he was Alibaba's real father. And knowing this, obviously he wanted to take Alibaba with him so he can be raised, in a royal household. But the problem with this was he only wanted Alibaba, not Kasim. Now, Alibaba didn't want to go, actually. He wanted to stay with Kasim, since all of them have been a family up to now. But Kasim was convinced that it was too different to stay pals, so Alibaba went back with his father, and Kasim stayed in the slums. At first, people around the palace treated him like filth. He was a kid from the slums. Obviously, right? But after a few years of hard work, he started to get respect from people around the palace, even one of his brothers, or half-brother at that. Everything seemed to be going good and dandy until he made one fatal mistake. You see, Alibaba couldn't quite forget about the slums, so one night he snuck out to go see them. This led him to meeting Kasim again, and everything seemed to be going well, until Kasim betrayed him and invaded the palace. By the way, he does end up resolving his problem with Kasim later. Maybe not in the best way, but still the problem was resolved. Now that I gave you a general idea about who Alibaba is as a character, let's talk about his powers for a minute. As I said earlier, Alibaba is the host of the fire gem of Mon. At the beginning, he could only use basic fire powers, but after he's able to master a full gem equip, he becomes immune to fire and able to absorb any kind of heat. Now, there is a limit to how much he can absorb. If he stores too much energy without releasing it, that is, he will just end up overexerting himself. His Scream Magic is probably the most destructive thing he has in his arsenal, being that it burns anything that it comes into contact with. Like in his fight against Hakuru, when he burned Hakuru's Scream Magic. If you're getting down to it, his sword and his gem equip is dangerous itself, being that it burns anything it comes into contact with too. Another power Alibaba has is one he received post-death, that being hyper concentration. This allows him to experience a single moment as if it were an eternity. Combine this fact that Alibaba is a master swordsman, even surpassing his master, who is one of Sinbad's lackeys, or servants. Alibaba is a legit threat. Now that's pretty much it. There are some things I left out in this video, so it won't end up being too long. But in my opinion, this still gives you a good general idea about Alibaba, being one of the best characters in the series right behind Aladdin and Sinbad. If you've seen the Red Magi, what do you think about it? Or what do you think about Alibaba as a character as a whole? Because to me, he's one of my favorites.